Hey, what's up, mortals? It is I, the Silent Sheepdog, here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 12 of What If Deku Had the System. I just wanted to greet you guys by saying, sit back, relax, you're in for a treat. And so, we begin. Izuku didn't know what was happening, for he had never seen this before. He was used to the system giving him various quests depending on his surroundings, but nothing was like this one. Now the system made it clear that failing to complete this quest would result in his death, and it scared him. He was scared because the system itself was going to kill him, not some powerful monster that stood as an obstacle. The same system that gave him his power and kept him alive for so long was going to kill him. He didn't understand it fully, but one thing was made clear to him. The system wasn't part of his body. It was an outside source. It was its own being, and it was just playing a part in his life. Izuku didn't get to think any further on this before Stain charged at him. He quickly regained his senses before dodging and parrying with his daggers. The hero killer was ruthless, swinging his sword like a wild animal as the greenette was being pushed back. Izuku dodged and parried like there was no tomorrow, all while desperately trying to find an opening. The timer was ticking down as they fought, so he really didn't have any time for any of this. That's when he'd had enough, and decided to make his own opening. Stain swung his sword at high speed, aiming for the neck, only to get parried. The blow, however, left Izuku wide open for another attack. So the hero killer struck again, as Izuku tried to evade, but it wasn't enough. Stain managed to land a hit on Izuku's shoulder, drawing blood as he did. Normally, a cut like that wouldn't be lethal, but these were different circumstances. The hero killer only needed to draw a single drop of blood to paralyze his opponent. After that, it would all be over. Stain raised his bloody blade up to his lips, intent on finishing this battle immediately. He stuck his tongue out for the blade, but was stopped. Before his tongue could make contact with the blood, it came flying off. It took him time to register, as the pain came exactly when he realized what had happened. It was Izuku. He had dashed at Stain and severed his tongue. The hero killer didn't understand it at first, but he had walked straight into Izuku's trap. The greenette had intentionally gotten hit, to make Stain believe that he had won. Then he had attacked him while his guard was down. The hero killer had now lost his most powerful weapon, his quirk, and Izuku wasn't letting him get away. Immediately after, he punched Stain's sword away, before throwing him against the wall. Then, without a moment of hesitation, he sunk both of his daggers into the villain's chest. Stain coughed up blood as he still tried to fight back, but it was for nothing. Izuku stared into his eyes, filled with a mixture of pain and bloodlust, and watched as they became devoid of life. Izuku pulled his daggers out of the man's corpse, letting it fall to the ground, as the system signaled that the quest had been completed. He panted heavily, being exhausted by the fight, as he looked to see that he had completed his quest with only 30 seconds to spare. Midoriya? A frightened voice then called out, knocking Izuku out of his thoughts. He looked to see that it was Ida, still lying paralyzed next to Todoroki. This brought Izuku back to his senses, realizing that he only had so much time before the other heroes arrived. So he steadied himself as he said, "Arise." To Stain's corpse. It responded immediately, and Stain rose up as a shadow soldier. At first he thought that he would have to deal with his anger, but when Stain kneeled, Izuku knew that it wouldn't be an issue for now. He then pointed at the corpse before saying, "Dispose of yourself. I don't want anyone to find your remains." With his usual cold voice. Stain stood up in response to this as Izuku turned to his two classmates, until he heard a familiar voice say,
"What about them?"
Izuku was confused, only to be shocked when he turned back. Stain had said those words, and he was pointing towards Ida and Todoroki. The greenette didn't understand what was happening, even if he had seen this before. Stain possessed the ability to speak, just like Igris, but he didn't know why. Igris was given that ability by the system, supposedly to help calm Izuku down, but Stain wasn't the same. It also didn't have anything to do with him being able to talk before dying, since Native couldn't speak either. There was only one thing that separated him: level. Stain's level was much higher, most likely from all the combat he had experienced, so it must mean that the shadows could gain the ability to speak if they became strong enough. Upon finishing this thought, Izuku took a deep breath before answering, "I'll deal with them," with his usual calm voice. Stain nodded to this, as he then proceeded to drag his own remains deeper into the alleyway. Ida and Todoroki didn't know how to process any of this. Not only was their classmate working with Stain, he was cold-hearted and a murderer who could raise the dead. "Midoriya," he uttered once more, still very frightened. The greenette approached them slowly, before crouching down in front of them. He looked annoyed, as if everything was inconvenient right now, as he said, "Why did you have to be such a moron? Look at the mess you've made. Why did you have to try and fight a hero killer of all people? Just what kind of hero goes after vengeance?" With a cold, yet irritated voice. Ida just got infuriated upon hearing this as he shouted, "Don't you dare talk about heroism, you damn murderer!" With rage in his voice. Izuku was unaffected by this, as he looked at Ida before saying, "I am a murderer. I don't deny that. But unlike you, I'm not an idiot. And I'm afraid that I can't allow anyone to know about my secret." With the same cold voice. Ida was a little angered upon hearing this, but he was also frightened. He didn't know what Izuku was thinking, and what he planned to do with them. "So what are you gonna do, kill us?" Todoroki then asked, sounding a little agitated himself. Izuku was still unaffected as he looked at Todoroki before saying, "No, I'm not gonna kill you. If I wanted you guys dead, I wouldn't have saved you." Now Ida didn't know what to think at all. His first thought was that Izuku might kill them, but he wasn't going to do that. His mind couldn't think of other things that he would do, but that's when Izuku spoke again. "I'm going to silence you. I have shadows placed on both of you at all times, and they will remain there to observe you. They won't disturb you if you keep quiet. But if you talk, they won't hesitate to kill you." Todoroki was frozen with fear upon hearing this, terrified by the idea of being unable to flee from this. Ida, however, was more infuriated as he shouted, "Like I'll listen to that! I don't care if I die, as long as I can drag you down with me!" With hatred in his voice. It was at this moment that Ida could feel the paralysis wearing off, as he could move his body again. He quickly pushed himself off the ground, intent on attacking the green-haired killer in front of him. Izuku was as unamused as always, not moving, despite seeing what was happening, as Ida charged, only to be pushed back into the ground. The blue-haired teen was confused as he struggled to get back up, until he saw who was holding him down. It was the shadow soldier of Tensei, his face covered by his black helmet. "Tensei!" Ida exclaimed in a mixture of shock and pain, as Izuku sighed heavily before saying, "You're lucky to be alive right now, and you have Mordred to thank for it. I only gave him one order, to follow and assist Stain. Never told him to protect you. Like I never told him to pin you down just now. With what seemed to be a disappointed voice. Ida was distraught after hearing this, but he didn't get to think more of it before Izuku said, I know that you'd rather die than let me go free. That's why you're a special case. Mordred will be appointed to observe you, and he will kill you if he sees it necessary. It's not just for you either. That goes for your family too. Ida's eyes widened upon hearing this, as he was left unable to utter any coherent words. I'm no longer asking you to keep my secret, because this is bigger than just you. So please, think about your family. Don't make your brother a killer, Izuku then said, finishing his piece. These words were all the final nail in Ida's coffin. His brother still cared about him clearly, but he was also loyal to Izuku. This meant one thing. He really wouldn't hesitate to kill them. These thoughts sapped the little strength that the blue-haired teen had left, as he lowered his head before crying. Izuku kept his calm expression even after seeing this, as he stood up to see that Stain had returned from his task.
What now, my liege?
The now black hero killer asked, wanting to know what the plan was. Izuku thought about it for a second until he decided to look through his quest rewards. What he found was a runestone that contained what he could only imagine to be Stain's quirk, along with a specific type of sword. Izuku summoned the blade, revealing that it was Stain's, as he said, Now, you make it look real, before handing the sword over to the shadow. Stain was confused by this at first, until he realized that Izuku had angled it so that the tip of the blade was pointing towards his own stomach. The hero killer hesitated upon seeing this, unsure if he really should do this or not. Izuku was about to say something, only to be interrupted by the sound of police and other heroes approaching. Now time was starting to run out, so Izuku looked at Stain and said, We don't have much time, so don't hesitate. Besides, it'll make us even. With haste in his voice. Stain was still unsure, but he listened to his master. He thrust his sword into Izuku's gut, going all the way through before pulling it out. After that, he retreated into Izuku's shadow. The greenette started to cough up blood, clutching the new hole in his stomach as he collapsed to the floor. Blood started to pool underneath him, and his vision started to fade, as the sound of distressed voices filled his ears before blacking out. The following day was quite busy for many heroes. They managed to defeat all of the Nomu, but they still didn't know where they had come from. Not only that, they also had to deal with 3 injured students from UA. Ida and Todoroki were still conscious when help arrived, so they told them what had happened. They told the heroes that they had gone after Stain, who had already killed Native, but were quickly overwhelmed by him. They were only saved by Izuku, but he had been horribly injured in the process. They then claimed that Stain had run off, but they didn't know where to. The pros seemed to be content with this story and rushed the kids to the hospital. Ida and Todoroki were then scolded by both police and heroes, who said that they weren't allowed to use their quirks in combat. When the topic moved over to Izuku, they were told that he was stable, and that he would soon be scolded for his recklessness. Ida and Todoroki were still shaken up. Everything they said was a lie, but they had no other choice. They were always watched, always monitored, and there was nothing they could do to change that. All they could do was play along, and keep a fearful eye on the presence of their shadows. This video is sponsored by NordVPN. Staying safe online is an ever-growing difficulty, and hackers could exploit you. NordVPN allows you to change your IP address, making you harder to track, securing your privacy. In addition to providing you with safe passage through the web, you can also expand the reach of your favorite streaming services. Are you tired of going through 2, 3, or even 4 streaming services to watch your favorite anime? Well, with NordVPN, you can change your country and be able to binge shows like My Hero Academia, Naruto, and many others on your favorite streaming service with just the press of a button. Check out the link in the description to get 72% off when buying for 2 years, $3.29 a month. This deal is for a limited time, and thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Time passed and Izuku made a full recovery. By that time, the internships had ended, and the students needed to return to UA. Izuku definitely could have sped up his recovery time, but he purposefully didn't do it. He needed an event that solidified his cover story, and making the pros believe that he was actually mortally injured worked well. Now they had no reason to believe that he was lying, and it had another effect, too. The pros believed that Stain only ran off after hearing them close by, so they got to play the role of saviors. They could tell themselves that the Greenette and his friends would have died if they had arrived any later, a story that benefited even them as heroes. Izuku went off scot-free, much to his own pleasure. Since no one knew that Stain had died, he could have the shadow of him go and continue his work. The Greenette continued to raise his army with Stain's help, and no one suspected a thing. There was one thing that needed to be addressed, but it wasn't something that he could do on his own. That's why Izuku had been called to the principal's office immediately upon returning to UA. The green-haired boy already felt sick, remembering his last encounter with the principal, but he still moved forward. He slid the door open upon arrival and was immediately met by both Nezu and Aizawa. "Midoriya, please, have a seat," the principal said, sounding joyous as he usually did. Izuku's expression was stern as he closed the door behind him before saying, "Thank you, but I'd rather stand," with a cold voice. The teachers were a little shocked to hear this, but they could understand that the boy was still upset, so they continued by saying, "Very well. We heard what happened to you. Are you all right?" with the same voice. Izuku kept his expression as he responded by saying, "Physically, I'm more or less recovered. Mentally, I've yet to assess." Aizawa and Nezu were once again shocked, for to them it sounded like Izuku wanted to end this meeting as soon as possible. They shook it off, however, before standing up from their seats. What happened next even shocked Izuku a little, for he hadn't really expected this. Both Aizawa and Nezu were bowing their heads in front of him. Confusion filled the boy's mind as Nezu then spoke again. "Midoriya, we owe you an apology. We've put you in grave danger, and you even got harmed as a result of it. Not only that, but we betrayed your trust. Words cannot describe how sorry we are." With a voice that was a little more formal than before, Izuku didn't know how to react to this, for he had never expected to hear an apology from these two. Still, it didn't change what they did, so he sighed and said, "Sure, if you say so," with the same voice as before. The teachers didn't expect any other response from their student as they continued by saying, "We hope that you'll be able to trust us again, so if there's anything we can do to make up for your losses, let us know." Now Izuku was a little intrigued, for an offer like this sounded a little too good to be true. "Anything?" the boy then asked, wanting to confirm his suspicion. Nezu also seemed intrigued now, wanting to know what the boy was thinking, as he responded by saying, "Yes, as long as it's within our capabilities." This got Izuku thinking. There were many things that he could use this favor for, so he would have to think carefully. That's when something hit him, so he asked. "If I recall correctly, the final exams are just around the corner, and you'll be arranging some sort of training camp after that." Quite curiously, now it was Aizawa that responded as he said, "Yes, the final exams will include both a written and practical portion, and you were correct, we'll be hosting a training camp shortly after. I'm afraid that I can't tell you any more than that." While also sounding a little curious. This made the final pieces fall into place for Izuku as he looked at Aizawa before saying, "Don't be. I won't be attending either of them," with the same voice as before. Both teachers were in shock now, unsure of what Izuku was thinking. That's when they both realized that this is what Izuku demanded for compensation. Midoriya, I don't think that's possible. The final exams are necessary to assess how far you've come and how you need to improve, while the training camp is crucial to negate any potential weaknesses. Aizawa then explained, his voice still filled with shock. Izuku was unaffected as ever, as he took a deep breath before explaining. I believe that you both know how powerful I am, and just how far ahead I am compared to everyone else. Taking the practical portion of this exam would be a waste of time for both of us, since we already know how it's going to end up. As for the training camp, you forget that I became this strong on my own. I know that I can grow much stronger, but I doubt that I'll need your help to get there. With the same cold voice as before. The teachers didn't know how to respond initially. Izuku had a point. They were already certain that he was going to pass the exam no matter what they tried. He was right when he said that he grew stronger on his own. He was already powerful before even joining UA. They didn't know what to say to this, for they still didn't want to grant this kind of request. This is when Izuku spoke up once more. You may be thinking that I'm asking for too much, so I should remind you of what I've been through on your behalf. I suffered emotional distress when I was separated from Igris. I suffered betrayal when you let someone else know my secret. And I nearly died from a stab to the gut while protecting my 2 idiot classmates. Tell me, am I asking for too much? He said with a far more menacing voice. The teachers were forced to abide now. If anything, they were the ones that had asked too much from Izuku. Their actions nearly killed one of their top students, and they needed to make up for it. Izuku could tell by the teacher's expressions that he had gotten what he wanted. While most of what he said was true, there was a lot of deception within it. Everything that involved his encounter with Stain was fabricated, and he managed to sell it by acting. Now he had guilt-tripped the teachers into doing him a massive favor. There was a big reason that he wanted these things. He mainly wanted to avoid the camp. This was so that he could tackle another dungeon, one that he had entered multiple times already, the Demon Castle. It was an S-rank dungeon, and he wanted to clear it now. There was a specific item, an ingredient, that he needed from the very top of that castle. This one ingredient could potentially give him something that he had been trying to find for a long time. A cure to even the worst of curses. Thank you all so much for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right here below in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects that our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I would like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye, and have a divine day.